I hate Miles Morales. I really hate that people are retroactively thinking that he's a good character because we had one iteration of the character be good. And no, the PlayStation series doesn't count for me. For many years, the main criticisms for Miles is that he's too OP, his stories are boring, the narrative bends unnaturally toward him in whatever story he's in, the writers don't know what to do with him, and they try to make him replace Peter in some way. Because of that, people don't say he's Spider-Man. He's just Miles Morales. He doesn't hold the mantle in people's minds. I don't have an aversion to someone else holding the mantle of Spider-Man. Many people have held it and made it their own thing. Spider-Man 2099, the Scarlet Spider, even the controversial Doc Ock Superior Spider-Man. But Miles just hasn't. In every iteration of the character since his inception, no one has grabbed onto the character for reasons other than him being a different race. Which I can only say because anytime you criticize him, you're called a racist. Until Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man PS4, no one liked this guy because of his stories. And Spider-Man PS4 was riding off the coattails of Into the Spider-Verse. I've never heard someone say, yo, pick up that comic with Miles. The story's really good. Miles is just a boring character. Partially because he was made during a time where culturally, characters had to be diverse in the shallowest way possible. Because of this, he's a super flat character. Now, the writers didn't have to do it in the shallow way, but that's just kind of what they did. But I want to talk about Across the Spider-Verse, a movie that I really liked up until I thought about the reasons why I don't like the canon concept. Spoiler, it mainly has to do with Miles and the story that the writers wanted to tell with him. All the criticisms for Miles and characters that hold mantles that people don't want them to have fallen under one question. What does it mean to be X? In this case, it's Spider-Man, but plop any hero that has its mantle being given to another person, then you'll see why or why not the character deserves that mantle. For example, people didn't like the main character of Blade Runner being seemingly replaced in Blade Runner 2049, but when the movie came out, they were like, this is Blade Runner. What's interesting is that the Spider-Verse movies are two movies that tackle the same question where one is written well and the other one isn't. Into the Spider-Verse asks what it means to be Spider-Man and answers it without bending the narrative unnaturally to have Miles meet the other characters in his Spider-Man journey. The movie is really good, and I think Miles' journey is well done and well written. There aren't glaring contradictions, nor do the characters bend toward liking him without cause. He earns his Spider-Man mantle in that movie, partly because he fails at being Spider-Man for a large amount of the runtime, and learns from that failure. During that failure portion, we see the idea that being Spider-Man isn't tied to skill or powers, but being able to persevere and do the right thing no matter what. Something that other Spider-Man media have done, but not with Miles particularly. I can't stress how much I enjoyed that first movie, so it makes it all the more disappointing when the sequel squanders this. If I'm honest, I don't think a sequel needed to be made for Into the Spider-Verse. At least not the one we got. I think them focusing on a more Miles-centric story without the Spider-Verse concept would have been better, but it's clear that they wanted to tell Spider-Verse stories with Into the Spider-Verse being a big focus. They could have made it an anthology series about different Spider-Man variants that people don't think deserve the mantle of Spider-Man and show that it really just takes a good story for them to be well received. But that's not what they did. So the main reason why people don't like Miles is that when he's in a story, the narrative bends toward him to an unnatural degree and gets through many of his plots through contrived means. So now it's time to talk about the quote-unquote canon concept and how it functions narratively. I don't particularly have a problem with the canon concept on its own. There are infinite timelines and possibilities, so things lining up for different versions of the same character is just a given when we're talking about infinity. In a narrative function, however, in the meta of this movie, they are using this to ask if Miles needs these quote-unquote canon events to be Spider-Man. We're retreading his arc in the first movie, but from a different perspective. Whereas before, he followed the traditional events of a Spider-Man story, but now the movie wants us to consider if he doesn't. Would he still be Spider-Man? This question on its own isn't really that bad, because you could just tell a story where those traditional events don't happen. Kind of like how the MCU did it, but people really didn't like that, and those people that didn't like that completely don't understand Spider-Man. But also, kind of like how Into does it, because it's not based on anything but the bare essentials of Miles, and they kind of changed them to fit it. Comic Miles and Spider-Verse Miles aren't even the same character archetype, but that's a different discussion. So back to the canon and how it functions. When you have characters know that these events are quote-unquote supposed to happen, that's where we have a problem. It's not organic anymore. These characters are functionally tools of the writers to put whatever agenda that they have into the story. And we kind of see this play out and across. Spider-Man 2099 gets a universe obliterated because he quote-unquote messed with the canon, and Peter 616 witnessed this. So it makes sense why they would think that jumping dimensions and staying in them long would be bad. However, it doesn't justify this.
You're a mistake! If you hadn't been bit, your Peter Parker would have lived. Instead, he died, saving you. Would have stopped the collider before it ever went off. Spot wouldn't exist, and none of this would have happened. And all this time, I have been the only one holding it all together. You don't belong here. You never did.
Miguel disliking Miles and blaming him for the messes that he is cleaning up in order to save infinite universes doesn't make sense for that character, as far as him saying Miles shouldn't be Spider-Man because of it. He's just a stand-in for the Spider-Man fans who don't like Miles. Again, from the meta point of view, he's the bad guy because he doesn't think that Miles should be or deserves to be Spider-Man because he doesn't adhere to the canon. And in that, he's forcing Miles to adhere to the canon, and that's what makes him bad. And him saying that Miles doesn't deserve to be Spider-Man because it doesn't adhere to the canon is a different type of criticism Miles gets when he's forced into the main timeline alongside Peter. He is just a stand-in for the Miles Morales haters narratively. This doesn't just extend to Miguel. Every person who knows about the canon concept is bent toward being in opposition with Miles unnaturally. Characters that we know, like Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter 616 Spider-Man, Spider-Man PS4, etc., all had their stories played out where they learned the exact same lessons as Miles did in the first movie.
You can't mean that. You can't just ignore that she's in danger.
Hey, I'm trying to focus on what's important.
What's important is not standing by and allowing someone to suffer or die because you do nothing. If you don't get that, then you don't get the first thing about being Spider-Man.
I never asked to be Spider-Man. I never asked for these powers. I never knew it would mean a bashed up hand, a hard 9 p.m. curfew, no job, and friends who all think I'm scum. It was all just a twist of fate. Bad luck, a random bug bite. Easiest decision I ever made. Except I saved him. Spider-Man's no magic wand, but thanks to the webhead, Kurt's cured, and Billy gets his father back. Spidey stays because Spidey's needed.
Is this an intervention or something?
We know it's hard, but it's the truth, Miles.
They somehow all agree that this canon concept needs to be adhered to. These lessons that every Spider-Man has learned, and these are the exact same lessons that make Miles disagree with the canon concept in the first place. He doesn't initially disagree because it's his father. He initially questions the metrics at which Miguel has come to the conclusion of adhering to this canon concept in the first place, and says that Spider-Man needs to try to save everyone where they can, even after he saw the video where Miguel obliterated a whole universe. The canon concept bends these Spider-Man characters to the will of the writers, not what makes sense for the character. It's contrived. Miles is put into a story that forces every Spider-Man that we know to make decisions that they otherwise wouldn't have made so that the writers can tell the story they wanted to tell. To provide commentary on the haters of Miles Morales, where Miles is Spider-Man and anyone who disagrees is just a blind hater, like all the other Spider-Man who follow Miguel. Don't you see? You're the bad guy for disliking him. The idea of the canon and Miles' place within it on a meta level bends the Spider-Man mythos to be more favorable toward Miles, which ironically goes against the point that the canon concept is supposed to be. It's a direct challenge to the idea that many fans have of Miles not being Spider-Man, mainly because they like Peter, but mostly because Miles doesn't have great stories, and most of his stories unnaturally bend the narrative to make him either overpowered or extremely unnaturally likable by others around him, despite not earning that. So the writer's brilliant story is to put every Spider-Man we know into a story that forces them to accept the concept of a canon, so that when Miles is written to go against this, he is viewed in the most favorable way. It's literally the criticism of the character. I do not believe, because we're talking about Infinity, that the majority of these Spider-Men would attack Miles to restrain him so that his father dies. Being there to clean up the mess of Kingpin's Collider makes sense, because we're talking about Infinity, an infinity amount of people being brought into the wrong universe. but them letting someone die for it just doesn't. I have to say that the story isn't finished, and obviously Miles is going to be right about the canon at the end, but right now, there just isn't enough evidence as to why these Spider-Men blindly followed Spider-Man 2099. At the end of the chase, we finally see him being challenged by Gwen about what if you're wrong, and his answer is to fearmonger. Am I supposed to believe that every other Spider-Man who asked why was met with the same unsatisfying answer? You could be wrong, so letting an infinite amount of people die is the best course of action. And in an attempt to hold the web of life and destiny together, how does Miguel even know about that, or that every universe would die if he didn't? Every Spider-Man and us, the audience, are just supposed to take that at face value. Well, whatever. This version of Miles is retroactively ruined for me. Even if it wasn't, I still wouldn't call Miles a well-written character because of all the really bad stories that he's in. But this version of him was good. But generally, his stories are well-written and well-received. Miles has had two major outings in the public eye. One is extremely well-written, that is ruined by a sequel, and one is passable because he basically does nothing and helps Peter a little. In his own game, the story is really bad, and it gets even worse in Spider-Man 2. But I think this video is getting a little bit too long, so I might make a sequel, but I think I made my point very clear.